one thing that I wanted to ask you about is how you've dealt with the use of ChatGPT in your courses. Because I saw that you wrote an article on university-wide policies concerning AI writing assistants.
That was wonderfully refreshing. And by a kind of happy accident, a bunch of my students were taking a course on like policy around technology, and they were asked to write a memo to the provost articulating a policy around these tools. And so we had lots of interaction about my policy and the work they were doing for their course and how it related to the work for my course. And it felt really vibrant to me as people were trying to figure this out. So that was one nice side effect. The other side effect was that I made ChatGPT a kind of character in the classroom. I would create prompts from my assignment questions and paste them in, and we would all study the results. And I reckoned that, it was like a C-minus student in my course. And some of the mistakes that it made are the sort of mistakes that would reveal to me that the student had no idea what was going on in our classroom. And so I warned students not to use the output uncritically. And then I did have this policy around when and where they could do it and how they needed to attribute the model itself. But fundamentally, it was just doing so poorly that it was kind of moot. And it was instructive for me we would look at the output and I would say, there's a lot of mistakes in this output. And if you yourself can spot the mistakes and correct them, you know what I care about. Yeah. So I wasn't worried about it. I think that in the future, I'm going to have to worry much more, but I narrowly escaped this quarter without really having problems that I know about.
That's quite funny that you would almost want your students, I'm putting words into your mouth, you would almost want your students to use it just because if they could correct it, then they've clearly learned something from you.
And I actually embrace that. I think that in going forward, we're going to value that skill a lot, that editing will become a more important skill than producing raw prose. It's not an easier skill. You need to know a lot of stuff to be an effective editor. And so, just move into that mental mode. You don't need to really do a lot of logarithm calculations by hand to do math these days. I guess that's a loss compared to hundreds of years ago, but it actually seems like a gain. I think the same thing will happen with these language models. The other thing that I mentioned as part of my policy is just this really nice equalizing effect that students whose native language is not English can use ChatGPT to just help them out with their prose. If I were having to do all of this work that we're doing in a foreign language, I would benefit enormously from a tool that would save me from all the hard work of figuring out whether I had the gender correct on the noun and all of that stuff.
I would push back against that, though, and say that it might be beneficial to have to struggle through learning the English and become a good writer.
People will do that. It's not about that. Just imagine, just think honestly for yourself about whether or not you've gotten as far as you have, in part because you get to conduct your entire professional life in your native language.
Oh, definitely. No, you're definitely right about that.
Yeah. I told the students that's why, whatever your feelings about this, and I mastery of any foreign language is incredibly useful and very difficult. Whatever your feelings about this, though, I personally have benefited so much from this English bias that I experience everywhere that I can't in good conscience forbid people to use tools that would actually amplify that advantage. That's just wrong. So,
no, I think your point is incredibly strong. I just wanted to push back a little bit against it, but I'm glad I did because that was a very good explanation. But I don't think that you've said just what your policy is and how you feel about university-wide policies.
Oh, well, the policy was just that they can use the models, but they need to quote just like you would quote any other source. And that I just mentioned in the policy that if your entire assignment is quoted from any source, it's going to do poorly, whether it was ChatGPT or Wikipedia or some canonical source, right? It's just not the way scholarship works. I also warned them that if they both got the same output from a model and submitted it, and two students' outputs looked the same, I would get them for plagiarism. Whether or not, it wouldn't matter that it came from the model, the assignments would be too similar. And I hope that gave them pause in terms of uncritically using the output, but it opens the door to doing something like writing your first draft, passing it through ChatGPT to have it corrected into formal academic English, because that's surely not going to run afoul of these policies. And I think it would not run afoul of the need to quote, because all it's doing is some stylistic adjustment, which is pervasive in our lives. The other thing that I said is that I just totally resist centralized policies on this. courses are going to differ, instructor goals are going to differ, student goals are going to differ, and the idea that there would be one policy that said something about this technology would just do damage. I also think it would be impossible to enforce, because who knows what precisely would count as the model that we don't want students to use. Would autocomplete count? Would spelling correction count? Right? And also, once you have a regulation, certain kinds of minds really want to find the boundary and toy with the boundary. And I was worried that it would create some incentives for students to actually do things that are counterproductive just to show that they could get away with it. I feel like I have that kind of mind. As soon as you show me a law, all I can think about is how I could abide by the letter of the law, but not its spirit, and what those things would be like. And it's just unproductive. It's just not the way we want our intellectual lives to be constructed, I think.
Something interesting about this rule that they have to quote ChatGPT just like they would any other source is that they have to be much more critical, to use your word, or much more vigilant about, or diligent about, what it is that they are quoting, because you can probably trust a cited, a well-researched human source, and if they are wrong, your professor might have some lenience. But if you quote something from ChatGPT and it's wrong, you can't rely upon that and say, "Look, give me an A. ChatGPT told me this." So they have to be much
That's
more
right.
critical of what
Absolutely
ChatGPT is
not.
actually doing.
That's right. The one striking case. So in the course we study this very abstract property of quantificational determiners called conservativity. The point is that it's obscure, and if you did this question as a prompt into ChatGPT, it gave you a fluent answer that was about some other notion of conservativity, which kind of borderline made sense. Maybe it's a real notion. I never really verified, but that would be the case where if you submitted that as a student, it would just reveal to the instructor that you had not attended class
Mm-hmm.
because it was just a different notion.